All right, everybody, welcome to Pensive Politics with Mr. Watson. I am your host, Christian Watson. And today we have a special guest who's going to talk to us about a subject that actually directly impacts what we do right here on this channel, on this show, all the time. It's the subject of algorithms. Anyone who is even a little bit aware knows that algorithms are the enemy of truth. And for a very long time, social media companies have been setting certain standards for different political groups, depending on if they affirm the countervailing prominent narrative at the time. And so, what is the solution to this? I think my next guest here has a pretty good solution to this. His name is Adam Weinstein, and I shall let him introduce himself to you. Adam?
Yeah, thank you. No, it's good to be here. So just to give some info on my background, I have a business degree, but I've also taught myself engineering programming, and I started getting into business analytics and working with data scientists, really just trying to better understand information, specifically when it comes to actually recruiting. But there is some overlap with the news space as well. But it was at that point a few years ago, right before the lockdown and COVID hit, that I really started to get into understanding how machine learning algorithms work, and started to see really an uprising in their implementations into the products we use and the impact that it has really in various industries. And then news was one that I was passionate about specifically. So that's really where I kind of came up with the idea for Syft News. But a lot of it really just stemmed from me wanting to raise more awareness around the technology itself. And that was really where a passion of mine was born out of.
Indeed. So, your project, for those who are unfamiliar, is Syft News. Now, tell us a little bit about Syft News. What is it designed to do? What need is it designed to meet?
Yeah, so the straightforward core principle that we're building around is giving control of the news experience back to the people, ultimately the user. So right now, what we see in a lot of digital news, which has really taken over how people read the news, a lot of it, social media, it's news aggregators, search engines like Google. A lot of these companies utilize algorithms, and it's ultimately a very passive experience where these companies are looking at your behavior, they're looking at what you're interacting with, and they're recommending this content to you based on your interactions, because their goal is to keep you ingrained in using the platform, right? That's how they sell ads, that's how they make money, that is their business. We're trying to bring a paradigm shift in terms of how we perceive reading the news, where instead of being really subjected to this passive experience, we are instead of analyzing people, we're analyzing the content itself and creating essentially a repository of information where you can go in and pick what you want to see and have a more active experience. Where if you want to look at something that leans left, something that leans right, you want to look at a specific topic, you will have the ability to do this without being at the mercy of an algorithm or what a website is designed to show you. These options and these filters generally aren't possible in the way that these other products are being built. So that's really what we're trying to bring new to the table.
And so, whereas the current algorithms are based on individual habit and selling data to cultivate a profile of certain people's habits, Syft News is based on a sort of customizable experience that the user has control over. Is that correct?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. Now, this has implications, radical implications. One of the implications, and I'm sure that you've looked into this, is the implication for privacy and security, because we've seen tech companies get in and get shrouded in chaos and conflict for being caught selling data of people to certain companies. Cambridge Analytica scandal is probably one of the biggest examples of this. Now, in a model that you propose, something like that wouldn't really be likely, would it?
In terms of what? In terms of
in terms of data of certain people's habits being sold under the system you propose, that wouldn't really happen now, would it?
No, exactly. Yeah, because there's no sort of recommendation or analytics running on the side at all. We're not really looking at your behavior. We're not here to teach you how to use it. It's really more so just a free platform where our focus is really just on aggregating and organizing information for you to be able to, I mean, I can't really avoid the pun, but it's to sift through the content that you see at your own will, right? That's where the name really came from. It's part of the experience of, you have the freedom to go in and see, well, what do I want to learn about? You can ask questions and find answers with the content that we have. And the idea is to have a bit more context, right, in front of you as you're clicking on the content, or even rather before you click on the content, you can see the political leaning. You can see if there's emotional language that we call sentiment. In terms of the writing, because a lot of the writing we see, I call it news that reads like opinion, where there's words that are injected into the story itself to propose a narrative to the people reading it, because obviously, people who write always have inherent biases. We're humans, right? There's no such thing as unbiased news anymore. And there may never have been unbiased news, but really what we're trying to do is build a tool to help you keep up with the speed of information and really just understand as much as, or as best as you can, the content that exists out there to make your own decisions and come to your own conclusions.
Now, a lot of people, to avoid the trap of an algorithm or to avoid being bound to a particular political leaning, will consider multiple different sources of news. Do you think that this is an effective way to avoid the manipulation of the algorithm, or does this take place in the same sort of system?
That's an interesting question, because I mean, I do think reading from different sources is always a good thing. It's just the tools that we have today don't necessarily facilitate that process.
Okay.
Like a lot of times, just to give you an example, a lot of the platforms I've seen, and social media is of course one of them, but there are other news aggregators that talk about news analytics. They recommend, or they analyze the content and they recommend it usually in the form of a newsletter or some sort of a daily or weekly report, but they don't allow the person to actually select the news sources that they read from. They don't allow you to actually sort of customize it in your own way. And I'm sure you're aware of this, but when you look at mainstream media today, most of it is leaning left. So a lot of the platforms that we're reading naturally lean left. And a lot of the people who are designing products like this don't account for that in their sample when they're doing this analysis. And that's really a big issue, because people might think that they're using something that is helping them keep a more balanced perspective, but they're not realizing that it's still leaning left. And that's really the biggest complaint I've seen. So like the natural instinct is to then subscribe directly to the news sources themselves, but a lot of those companies also, the subscriptions are very expensive, sometimes prohibitively so, where one news subscription could be as much as a Netflix subscription, if not more. So it's, at that point you're only really reading from one, maybe two sources. So what we're trying to do is open up the options that people have to really try to make sure that they are reading from different viewpoints and perspectives, ideally even beyond just the major national sources, because a lot of those get a little extremist at times as well.
Yeah, interesting. So I use what is called an RSS feed reader, and a lot of people may have heard of that. Personally, I didn't really know what they were in relationship to reading and consuming information. I know what the RSS feed was for podcast, but I didn't know went beyond that small application of it. And so what would your product do that an RSS feed reader does not do?
Yeah, our RSS is interesting because it's been around for a long time, but I feel like it's kind of fallen by the wayside in a lot of the tech. So a lot of the Feedly was one of the ones that I looked at earlier on, because this all started with me trying to find alternate avenues to find news, and when I didn't find anything I liked, I started to work on theorizing and building out Syft News. But so that the main thing is it kind of, well, I mean, a lot of the ones, just to start, they're geared more towards business and research now, where a lot of them have gone the route of AI as well. And one of the main things I didn't like with a lot of the the tools I saw was that people when you go to read the news, you don't necessarily know what you want to know or look for or look at in that particular day. So it's really hard to try to train an AI model to do that for you. Now, if you're in research or if you're looking into some hyper specialized content that you need to know about this, then that makes sense. But it just seemed like it was more designed for like a research space versus a casual news consumer. And the other side of it, this one was more specific with Feedly, was that you couldn't really filter through the content very easily. It's great for power readers, but if you just wanted to spend 5 minutes, check on something or see if something was new, you couldn't really do that. Like I couldn't use keywords or something to filter down the content, or I couldn't, you could select news sources. But even if you could, you didn't have the analytics in front of you in terms of where the content was leaning, if there was emotional information. There was no sort of transparency around fact checking. There was no transparency around the author of the content. So these are the factors that we want to embed within the experience itself that we haven't seen in the RSS feed readers.
Interesting. Yeah, I've noticed some of the same problems that you've noticed as well. I used Feedly for a very long time, and what I found a long time, like a few months, and what I found is that I would go on the app, I would try to play with it, and it would update things all the time, but it would just be a bunch of random stuff that whatever website I subscribed to just spit out. It was not really customizable all that much. You could have little folders where you have different topics, but again, it's the same kind of content, just whatever is spitting out. Although I do think it's better than nothing if you're trying to be informed. But at the same time, there's also limitations as well. There are some websites that the RSS feed, something's wrong with it, and they will not pop up on the reader, unfortunately. So there's a bunch of problems with them. It's kind of like a broken technology in a sense. So tell me, what is your vision for Syft News? Where do you see it in 5-10 years? What impact do you want it to have on how people consume information and how people reach conclusions, whether it be conclusions in their political thinking and their social thinking and their way how they approach knowledge in general outside of those two topics? What do you want to happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'd say in an ideal future, my hope is that this will ultimately combat political polarization to try and, I guess, in a way, help to normalize the way that people perceive the world and information. And I mean, normal is not a great term to use, I guess, but normalize in a way that it's not like people can understand that there's no such thing as unbiased news, right? And people are going to have agendas, and there's going to be information that will come out in a way that you have to perceive as, okay, well, what are they trying to really say, right? Because I guess, again, in an ideal world, maybe we could live in a world where people do not write news with as much of an emotional charge, but I don't know if that's solvable in the next 5 to 10 years. But realistically, I see this as being a platform that will give people the tools to really just better understand what the content is trying to say and be better informed for it. Whereas now, a lot of it's like you're drinking through a fire hose, right? There's so much content that's coming out that it's hard to comprehend what is actually happening or around a particular event and understanding actual viewpoints. And a lot of people find themselves in this sort of intellectual isolation where they keep seeing and reading things that fuel their own beliefs and validate their own biases. I'm hoping this is a platform and really part of a movement that I see happening over the next few years, where people are able to just monitor their blind spots more and be more open to other ideas and seeing the world through other people's eyes, try to bring more empathy into how people perceive the world, how people read content, and just see things with more open eyes, as opposed to, because I've seen relationships end over political differences. I've seen friendships end, family members arguing with each other over viewpoints, and a lot of that comes down to, at least from what I've heard, they can't see through the world through their eyes, and so instead of engaging in that conversation, they just turn it off or block you or ignore you, which that fuels the intellectual isolation that we see a lot of social media and other platforms continuing to build on, because again, they're not designed for this type of content.
Right.
And so instead of blocking people, actually asking questions, or be able to go to the platform and find news that is on a topic that they feel strongly about, but look at alternate views, and not just extremist views, but maybe something that's like moderate right and moderate left, just to be able to understand more information around why someone could hold that viewpoint, and maybe just create a more of a platform or a basis around how to have better conversations and discourse. And so that's kind of a lot there, but that's where I see it going, right? Is trying to just facilitate this process, because the political polarization and the sensationalism we see in media is only gotten worse the last few years. And
Yes.
I haven't seen anything to help correct course or reverse that momentum. I mean, it's like a train going off the rails, what I've compared it to, because one side fuels the other. And so I'm hoping this is sort of a mediator in a sense.
This is a very noble goal. I think it's probably in principle one of the more effective ways to combat ruthless division. I say ruthless because not all division is bad. Division is actually a natural necessity. If we didn't have division, we wouldn't understand concepts as separate and related to each other. So I think that ruthless division, though, which is enmity, it's anger, it's hate, it's conflict between two people or more people, that's what causes the problem. And there's a distinction that's never really made, but that's what we're seeing right now in our political conversation. I think it's one of the better tools in principle to do so, because it actually is trying to take a methodological approach to how people consume the root of these conflicts, and that is information. Information is always the root of the conflict. People say money makes the world go around. No. It's information that makes the world go around. Because if you don't have information, how will you apply your money to something? It's information that makes the world go around, and that's what a lot of political opportunists and tech companies understand very intimately. That it is information that makes the world go round. And if you can control the information, you can control how one reacts to the information. You can control how the problem is framed. You can control quite a lot. And this is the fundamental issue. It's like the Matrix. It's almost exactly like the Matrix, right? I was actually watching Matrix Resurrection the other day, the newer one, which is an okay movie. I kind of liked it. There were some problems, but nothing beats the first one. And then the first one, Neo really has to be confronted with the fact that where he's at right now, he is in a world of information capture, a world dictated by these machines who have enslaved all these human beings, are keeping them over in pods. But Neo, the thing about him is that Neo has the potential and the capacity to go ahead and overturn the sort of algorithm, to flip the script, to break the code. And that's why he was called the One. And the thing is, I think all of us have a Neo inside of us. I think all of us have a mini Neo inside of us. But just like Neo in the movie, without the tools to actualize our ability to break the algorithm, to break the dichotomy, and to actually explore concepts beyond that which is set for us by big tech companies, by big media companies, without the tools, our potential cannot be actualized. Perhaps Syft News, to bring it back down to earth a little bit, is one of those tools. Maybe it is. Now, there's a complication that I see, and it is this. What happens, because Syft News would simply be a tool that gets information to people in a manner that is agreeable to them. But how does this fix the type of information they get? So let's say someone is able to customize the kind of information that they get from a source. What if the source itself is bad? Sources like, CNN or MSNBC or whatever it is, whatever side, whatever corporate media it is. These are sources that are curated towards certain ideas, and they push certain ideas. And I want people to get information, but is it better for them to get information from certain sources that are not curated to certain artificial ideas of reality? Or is it better for them to get no information at all? I mean, it's the same kind of thing. If you read the press, you're misinformed. If you don't read the press, you're uninformed. So I guess the question here is this: you can change how people customize their information experience, but does this actually fix the problem of the information that they're actually getting? That's the big issue, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, it's an important distinction to your point. Like, if I would say, ignorance is not bliss. So I'd say reading something is better than nothing. Um, but the caveat there is, in the ideal scenario, you're not reading content that is deliberately trying to propagandize or misinform
Mm-hmm.
the content that it is delivering or addressing. And that kind of even feeds back into the vision where this is going to be a process, right? And sort of, I also want to just point to a lot of the current tools aren't really addressing what you're talking about. A lot of the
I agree.
current
Yeah.
methods they're really just aggregating the content. I used to work for Boeing, so one of my old
Mm.
employers used to say garbage in, garbage out in terms
Mm.
of
Wow.
process, which is poetic when you look at the news space today, where if you're analyzing and classifying essentially garbage news, you're going to get a garbage output and a garbage product, and the information itself isn't going to have nearly as much of an impact as you would be led to believe.
Mm-hmm.
That's why. So one of the main things, and this is not to be clear, like, we have a basic version 1 of the product today. So this is more in the future, but where I am particularly passionate about in terms of the direction that I would want to take the Syft News product itself is to bring on more independent, nonpartisan sources. We're seeing
Oh,
a
interesting.
rise in independent creators. Like, I don't know if you've heard of Substack or other
Yes.
companies that allow you to host your own newsletter, for example.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So what we're seeing is that people are able to start producing their own content. And local news used to be the lifeblood of this country, but it's not the case anymore. And I can get into why that is, a little bit later. But to kind of answer your question, what we would want to be able to do is bring on more diverse perspectives from people that aren't governed by lobbyists or people with
Mm-hmm.
the power to be able to dictate what is shared on the news or to control a
Mm-hmm.
narrative. People who are really more concerned about, good quality journalism or writing, not necessarily even for a particular audience, but just to try to inform people who are actually passionate about reporting, because and even just restore some sense of, I guess, honor to what
Mm-hmm.
journalism used to be, right? Because journalists years ago used to be highly respected people. This is, a public service, as you said. Information makes the world go around, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a core part of society. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's if people are uninformed, I mean, we got North Korea. As if you want to look at what censorship does to a country, or you look at Russia. So information and freedom of information is incredibly important, especially as we continue to move into the future and then the world becomes more digital.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I guess just to kind of really, get back to your point though, that's the direction where I would want to take this. I would want to get more people who are, I don't want to say unbiased, because again, it's really hard to do that, but at least not partisan, and people who are more focused on factual, less sensational writing, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and reward those people who are doing that work. Because I mean, my belief is that, similar with, like, if you're familiar with a Patreon, even example, where you know allow people who are writing that kind of content and give them a platform to grow their user base outside of, like, a social media, put them on the
Mm-hmm.
Syft News platform and help
Mm-hmm.
get that content out to more people who are looking for that type of content. And then over time, what I believe would happen is that people will find content and pockets of information, people that they trust and will follow, even more so than the national sources, but ultimately give those, smaller local people, maybe not the means to compete with the larger sources, but at least a platform to help get better, more high quality content out there, and ultimately make that available to people as well, based on what they are looking for.
So if I'm getting this right, you don't just plan to be a tool that people can use to customize their experience. You also plan to bring on certain voices that are more independent, who will have a key part in people's experiences if the person in question wants them to have that part, basically.
Yeah, it's because that in my mind will
Yeah.
help broaden the perspectives and open the conversation up, so it's not just
Yeah.
Fox and CNN constantly,
So
or
you're going
looking
to,
at.
sorry, go on.
Yeah. So the overall vision is to be able to bring on more sources that people perhaps never even heard of,
Yeah.
or just passionate, independent people that are producing local news, or even working at the national level. Because what you're seeing too is a lot of people that, like you take the Morning Brew, for example, they realize that original content is key, right? There's only so much political commentary that people can make, because I mean, you're sort of in this space too, to be honest, where, you know, it's very competitive because a lot of people are doing it. But what if you had the means to go out and, yeah, exactly. I was thinking, what if you had the means to be able to produce your own original content, maybe even run and manage a small newsroom, right? And you had the resources to build people out, where, you know, either in your town or wherever you would care about. You can have someone in DC, or you can even have your own local correspondents to help you write original content, and even further differentiate yourself from other people. That's all related to the type of content I would want to have on Syft News. But this would be particularly in the written medium, but, you know, obviously the idea is if you're producing good content, you build your network, you can generate, you know, more income, right, from that side of the platform, and ultimately grow your network, build your resources, and continue growing in that way. You can then get people on your Substack and really try to open up your ability to grow yourself or market yourself or your team, whatever it might be, as a source of information to, you know, ideally be able to at least start to compete with these other news sources that people feel like they're obligated to read just because they're the major national sources and that's what's available to them.
Sure. Now, is there, so what about content creators like me who are primarily video? How would Syft News be able to benefit someone like me? Because like someone who's had a Substack or is trying to start a sort of written newsroom, brilliant. And I think that we absolutely need something like this. This is something that is absolutely vital, because a lot of those news upstarts have a very hard time getting past the algorithm and getting to people. And so if there's a place where they can be easily accessed, oh my, that's great. But what about people who are on the new medium? What for them?
No, that's a great point. I mean, it's not something I've even thought about necessarily, to be honest. I was focusing on written just because that seemed to be the thing. But honestly, even I mean, just competing against the YouTube algorithm is a pain, from everything I've been hearing and reading about. So it's a great point. I mean, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't be able to support video. It's not something, again, that we have right now, but just as a further way to do it, I wouldn't say that that's something that is like impossible, that we could never do. So I'd say that's certainly something to think about, to again further differentiate your product and reach people and new audiences. But I mean, I think the core goal, if I were to just boil it down into a simple sentence, is that we're just trying to cut out the algorithm, you know, middle person, to you know, allow content creators to immediately interact with content consumers within the news space, because it doesn't have to just be politics either. I mean, this is something that can grow beyond even just U.S. news. We can, I mean, I've talked about sports with people. Like I play fantasy football, and that would be a great tool for me to be able to use, even to just aggregate people that I have on my roster. So that's really, if I were to boil it down, that's where it is. So the video is certainly fair play as well.
How close to completion or to beta or to alpha stage, whatever stage, is Syft News?
So actually right now, as of couple of months ago. We launched what's called an MVP, or minimum viable product. So that's our first step into what I would call an active news experience. We have about 30 sources from across the political spectrum that content's refreshing every minute. So it's pretty much up to date. And that's sort of just like the first example. So I'm working through an incubator now, full transparency. And so we're actually in the process of trying to get signups. We're about 20 to 30 away from moving forward into the funding stage. So that's like right now our goal is to start talking about it, generating signups, to move into what I would call our sort of alpha stage. I would say this is still, borderline alpha at this point. This is more so just like the first, it's like one step above a prototype. But what we're trying to do right now is build out and flesh it out a little bit more to get to that first alpha phase. But we're very much on the way, and we've been picking up momentum because a lot of people do identify with this and want to see it happen. So that's really where we're at. It's about just getting the signups, and then once we get that, the next phase would be raising initial investment to be able to build out a more fully fleshed out version that we could really take more national.
Absolutely. And the website is active, though, correct? The website is active.
Yeah. I mean, I use it myself. Yeah.
Absolutely. If someone wants to have a piece of the Syft news experience right now, is it possible?
Absolutely. Yeah.
But it's still under development, though. So there's more things to be expected, more things that are coming.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, it's like right now, I've spent the last few months really building it. It works on desktop and phone, mobile as well. It's not an app. It's just, if you go to syftnews.com, you'll be able to sign up and see the experience for yourself. But eventually the idea will be to build it into an app, of course. Or at least make it more readily accessible. And there's other feature sets and things that I'm building out, I'm building out actively, but more so theorizing right now. But I mean, I think the cool thing with this too is that if you wanted to get involved, we're early enough right now where the people who sign up and are engrossed within the community now will dictate the future of the product, because ultimately we're going to be building this around feedback from what people want to see in their news experience. And as we get more funding, because right now it's literally just me and my friend, my co-founder, also named Adam Weinstein, funny enough. So it's really just us two right now. So the idea is we can continue to build this out, get more resources, build out our own team, and then continue to build onto the core product that we already have built out now. And you can have a say, of course, in the direction that we go, what features you want. And continue to grow this, which is what I think is hopefully a part of a larger movement towards just more conscious consumption of news and information, and just being more aware of the state of the world, right? In a more, I guess, just pragmatic sense, if I were to put a word on that.
Absolutely. I support your project entirely. I think that it's incredibly necessary. I think, as I mentioned, Neo needs his tools. Hopefully, this is one of the first tools that the Neo within inside of us can get. Because I am really troubled by what I've seen happen in the political discourse over the past few years, even over the past few months. I'm troubled, and I won't get into specifics, but I'm troubled. But if people want to find more information out about you and Syft News, where can they go?
Yeah, I mean, ideally it would be syftnews.com. I can send you the link to include in the description or something. And
we'll do that.
All social media is all just at Syft News. And then I've also just started a Medium blog, where I'm writing more about my thoughts and just really expanding on the vision and goals and things that I have in mind beyond just what's on the website, since the website itself is generally pretty simple, just in terms of discussing the problem and the solution. So the blog is really a place for me to be able to spend more time exploring and discussing more about the vision, and more aligns with what we've just talked about too.
Well, again, I am incredibly happy you decided to come on. I think everyone should go to syftnews.com and support their mission in any way you guys can. do you have anything else to say about the project or anything in general that I've mentioned before we go, Adam?
Sure. Yeah. I'd say overall, again, I appreciate you having me on and just being able to talk about it more. The only other thoughts I'd have, really just around, we are still in the process of building this, and I think it's exciting and an exciting time to really be a part of this because looking into the future and looking even and interacting with other people who are passionate about the project and where it's going is that. It's really going to be a grassroots effort, right? Because even our marketing right now is pretty bare bones at this point. Really, it's just through word of mouth and trying to get people to really just see what it is that we're trying to do. Since it is a bit abstract, at least at first, because it is something that is certainly unique to what exists out there. But I think that's the exact point to be made. Where like this is why we're trying to take this approach because it's like it just seems like for whatever reason people have been missing the mark, but I'm really hoping that this is our opportunity to really present something into the market and to people to really just start to think differently about how we all read the news and think about reading the news. So I guess in that sense, like any support, even sharing it, talking about it with people, helping us to raise awareness is all very much appreciated and absolutely necessary just for our success and really trying to bring this into reality. So yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, again, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for trying to make a change in our current information environment. I do look forward to seeing what Syft News does. And if there's anything that I can do to help, please let me know because I want to do everything I can in my limited power to promote this project. So let me know. Okay.
I appreciate that.
All right. And everybody else, I hope you guys have a nice day and please stay pensive. Bye-bye.